There are some people on social media kind of running around saying, hey, I own 8 businesses and I bought them all with no money down and the seller carried them all and I installed a manager and I go fishing with my kids every day. And it's like, that is not true. That does not work. And on top of that, I mean, as an SBA lender, we have regulations we have to follow and we're not going to allow that either. So maybe if you're looking at a deal with a buyer and maybe you've already kind of gone through the process with them, you've understood that they are a real buyer, they've got the capability of buying the business. What are maybe 1 or 2 red flags that you're seeing pop up consistently when you're looking at a deal, just right from the start?
The biggest red flag for me is when I see CIMs that have no balance sheet information, because it means that both the seller and maybe the broker as well are completely focused on the P&L, and they just see it as the operational side of it. They see the sales, the cost of sales, the overhead expenses, and they're completely ignoring what the operating capital situation looks like how much money is tied up in inventory and AR and all that kind of stuff. And it's funny because when you press back and you say, we need the balance sheets in order to make an offer, a lot of brokers who don't understand these concepts will say, well, why? What do you need that for? And the reason the sellers don't want to share the balance sheets is because they've got things on there like their credit card balances and stuff like that sometimes. And when you try to explain to someone, I need to know how much operating capital is required because that affects the value of the business. If I'm going to buy this thing, in particular, a lot of deals for small businesses are done as asset sales. And a lot of the time, the operating capital components are not being transferred over. So if I buy this business and then I got to put in another 300 grand, then my investment just went up by 300 grand. And whether I borrow that money or I put it in cash, it doesn't really matter. My investment has gone up. And if there's 2 businesses with the same cash flow side by side, and one's going to require a further 300 grand and the other one is not, then the one that doesn't require the extra money is obviously worth more, right?
Right.
Because at the end of the day, what we're doing is we're investing in a cash flow and we're looking at what we have to invest to acquire the cash flow. And so there's scenarios where there's certain kinds of businesses where there's a lot of operating capital involved. And because the broker either doesn't know or they're ignoring this whole thing, they don't bring that to the conversation. And one of 2 things will happen. Either they'll meet people that ask questions that they don't want to answer, and they'll forego in getting involved with really qualified buyers because the buyer is understanding these concepts. They're qualified. They know what they're doing. Or they will basically accept offers on the business. And then by the time the buyer goes through a process and meets a banker, looks at the numbers, they really get into investigating it. Maybe they even do a QOV, and then they realize the added investment and they realize that the numbers won't work. They'll try to change the deal. And the seller has already, got his number kind of pegged at where he thought he was going to get for the business. And then they don't want to negotiate again. The deal falls apart. And these things just kind of like stay on the market and they go through this cycle a few times. And time just ticks by. And usually when someone puts a business up for sale, they have a reason for wanting to sell it. And a lot of the times those reasons are not durable over time. The other big red flag that I see is when people completely ignore CapEx. It's funny that we use SDE or EBITDA as the cash flow basis for valuing small businesses. And I was listening to a podcast about 2 months ago where one of the big online influencer gurus that we were just alluding to was on there saying that small businesses sold for 2.5 to 3 times profit. And it made me chuckle because SDE is not profit. It's
Right.
not. It is a budget. And it's a budget from which you need to take a salary home for yourself, service any debt. You got to pay your taxes from that money. You also have to get a rate of return on the cash you put into the deal. And you've got to take care of capital equipment because in order to get SDE or EBITDA, we're adding back depreciation and amortization. And that's how accountants sort of describe the capital equipment, the fixed assets wearing out. And so if you've got a little corner store with a couple of coolers and some shelves, obviously the CapEx of that business is very different from somebody who's running heavy equipment to put foundations in for houses, right? And so this is another place where I'll see inexperienced brokers in particular try to find some kind of benchmark for value as a multiple of SDE or EBITDA for this kind of business that has a lot of equipment. They'll just multiply that number and say, here's what the business is worth. And again, inexperienced buyers might organize a deal on that basis. But by the time they start talking to bankers and lenders, et cetera, they soon begin to realize that a huge chunk of that EBITDA has to actually go to replacing the heavy machinery that wears out, like a tractor or a backhoe or something. It's only got a certain amount of hours in it before it's probably got to be replaced. And all of that CapEx comes out of cash flow.